are listening to
The Larry O'Connor Show podcast.
Tom Fitton of Judicial Watch is trying to stay on top of so many things going on in our country right now. Tom, thanks for joining us. Happy Easter, sir.
Happy Easter to you, Larry. Thank you.
Let's start with getting this economy back rolling again here, if possible. Do we have any? I just mentioned this earlier, Tom. It seems like all of these decisions that are going into shutting down the economy, the governors are all, putting these restrictions on us at our local level. They're making these decisions based on meetings they're having outside of the public realm. We have no idea what numbers they're looking at, what reports they're looking at, who's giving them advice. I mean, what happened to public debate in this country?
Yeah, it's one thing to have a quarantine or restrictions put in place during an emergency that lasts a few days or a week or maybe two. But now they're talking about restricting our liberties for months. And if you are to do that, you need a compelling government interest, the lawyers would like to say. And given the lack of numbers, and frankly, the data suggesting that we are actually winning and we can declare cautious victory in the sense that much of the country is free of any serious threat of being overwhelmed, we should be able to get back to work. And there's got to be accountability for the governors for their destruction of our liberties and the destruction of our economy, because the consequences there, both in terms of the health and well-being of the United States, is as severe as anything we're facing from the pandemic.
And at what point can Americans start petitioning their government? We used to have the right to assemble and to address redress with our government and our elected officials to say, hey, you're killing me here. You put me out of work. You're pushing me into poverty. I demand some sort of hearing here so that my voice can be heard. That it seems like that part of it is lacking in this whole process.
Well, I think enough time has passed that you're going to start seeing the lawsuits crop up. You saw over the weekend one federal court judge pushed back against overreaching by a Louisville, Kentucky mayor who was going to prevent a drive-in church service from taking place that would have involved people sitting in their cars from the appropriate distances from each other to hear a service on the radio, more or less. And the federal judge says, you can't restrict that. So in the area of religious expression, I think you're going to see judges pushing back because the government has to meet significantly serious burdens to justify restricting your free exercise of religion. And to say that you're worried generally about a pandemic, I don't think is going to hold water the longer it goes on, because there's no clause in the Constitution that gives the government the right to control everything we do because of this health concern that is growing vaguer by day. More vague by day.
And to that end, though, Tom, we have seen governors sort of overreaching while everyone's focusing on the coronavirus. What was most specifically in Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam, not only has he put in quite a significant level of provisions to keep people from going about their daily life, but he's also signed into law some things that are really going to affect the election coming up this November, not least of which doing away with voter ID. I know you're on top of that.
Yeah, Virginia used to be one of 7 states that had the strictest photo ID laws in the country. Photo ID, which is the best way to provide security. And in one fell swoop, the left and signed into law, I think it was on Easter Sunday, Governor Northam removed that. So you can go and vote in Virginia. You don't need an ID. They ask you to show one. If you don't want to show one, all you need to do is sign something, and you'd be doing it under oath. And that is subject in theory to a criminal penalty. But you don't even need to do that. If you don't want to do that, you can just give a provisional. You can just vote, and they'll take your ballot provisionally, and they may actually count it in the end. So Virginia, in one fell swoop, went from being the most serious state about protecting clean elections to undermining in a dramatic way by effectively removing any ID requirement to vote. You show up, you sign, and and we all know these cases aren't pursued. So people who sign fraudulently, what is the risk of them being pursued? Virtually nil.
Well, and Tom, at the same time Governor Northam in Virginia is doing that, you're seeing Nancy Pelosi and Democrats at the federal level trying to mandate vote-by-mail provisions, again, under the guise of the pandemic. How they know what we're going to be doing 7 months from now, who knows? But that's a lethal combination of lack of accountability in our ballot process, isn't it? When you've got no need to show a voter ID if you do show up, and otherwise you can just put it in the mail anyway. How do we know who's voting?
Well, exactly right. The most secure way to vote is in person and private. And once you remove that, once you tell people they can vote from home, once the U.S. Postal Service, which evidently is on the verge of collapse, we're told every time they need money, is involved, it leads to fraud. It leads to lost ballots. It dramatically increases the risk that the elections will be stolen. And the bill in Virginia, or the state reforms in Virginia, show it was never about coronavirus. And Pelosi is using coronavirus as an excuse. Her agenda was front and center when they took office in 2018. In fact, it was their first bill they put out there. So undermining free and fair elections has been a priority for the left for 2 years now. And let's not pretend the coronavirus is the reason. It's now the excuse. But it's been their agenda front and center. And now they're going to try to use it as a pretext to set up a system to make it easier to steal the elections in November 20. I call it, setting up the steal. That's what's happening here. Because why else would you oppose voter ID and want to mail people who may have moved away or died ballots, require no one to certify their identity with any document in order to vote? Allow third parties to go around, collect votes and ballots, allow, quote, ballot boxes where people can just drop off ballots in a box.
It's
not
terrifying.
even third world.
Yeah.
I mean, even
we would demand more.
Dictatorships, they have a more regular voting process. What's being proposed.
We demand more of Iraq and of Afghanistan when we liberate those nations from tyranny, and they finally get the chance to vote. I mean, we would never allow them to get away with something like this. Tom Fitton is our guest, president of Judicial Watch. I do want to pivot back to the revelations from the last 72 hours with regard to the Spygate story that you were a huge part of uncovering. Listen, it's not a revelation to learn that the Steele dossier was full of Russian disinformation. We've been saying that for years now, Tom, but now it's official in a government document exposing that. What does that mean in terms of some criminal culpability here for the people who pushed this thing?
Well, it shows they had more reason to doubt the information. They certified it was true repeatedly to the courts, and that obviously wasn't true.
They meaning the FBI. They meaning
the FBI, Justice Department, whoever was involved in it, and everyone was involved in it. And now remember, the revelation isn't that for sure it was Russia disinformation, is that they suspected it was. But anyone reading the dossier would have seen that it was either Russia disinformation or just a smear operation. I tend to be of the point of view that they just made it all up, the FBI and the Clinton camp. And there were cutouts from the West that were willing to say things to make it seem like it was legit in the intelligence world. But the corruption here is just escalating. My concern is I'm not seeing any similar escalation out of the Justice Department in holding people accountable. We got information that the FBI was involved at least in 29 what I would call illegal warrants on FISA, in addition to the Carter Page warrants. We've had the FBI director, Comey, his assistant director, McCabe, be referred to the DOJ for criminal leaks and lies. Nothing ever happened. I'm waiting. I'm hoping, but we're not going to wait. We're not going to wait in the sense that Judicial Watch isn't going to do anything. That's why our lawsuits are going to keep on pushing. Hey, I want to go back to this voter fraud, though.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is a big deal. In North Carolina, we just filed a lawsuit last week, finding at least the lawsuit found at least 1 million names, nearly 1 million names, on the rolls who probably shouldn't be there. That's why we can't have vote by mail. They're going to be mailing those people ballots.
Yeah. And by having it via mail, Tom, that it takes that extra set of eyes, right? I mean, one thing about the public process of voting, when you go to your local polling place, you sign on the line, you get your ballot, everybody's watching. There are watchers from both parties that are part of the process as well. So that if anything weird happens, if there's any question, they can sort of flag that. Who watches when the entire thing is done by mail?
That's right. And, there's this word the art dealers use when they talk about a work of art. They ask what the provenance is. Mm-hmm. Tell us where you found it. How did it get here to make sure it's legit? And when you remove voters from the ballot box and have them vote who knows where and under what circumstances, you undermine the provenance of the ballots, and you can't trust them. And frankly, Larry, there's too much vote by mail here in the United States. It's too easy to get absentee ballots in many states. Of course, the reality is, in most states, you can get an absentee ballot and send it in with no problem, no voter ID requirement. The problem the left has, there are a few states that actually try to follow some sensible rules in terms of requiring a real reason to vote by mail and real ID in order to actually have that vote counted. And the left wants to undermine that and take away any voter ID in a massive vote by mail system. We just can't stand for it. I mean, we're already lost our economy. We're losing our liberties. And now they just want to blow up the elections.
Well, and it often seems like they're doing it with nobody watching, but we know the Judicial Watch is watching, at least as much as you can, Tom. Listen, I appreciate you joining us today, as it's a big part of the conversation is how we're losing liberties during this thing. And again, and real fast, this bothers me so much because we are losing liberties to the hands of these elected officials because we're nice, because we're good, because we do want to help our fellow man. We want to help. We don't want to be responsible for getting one of our brothers and sisters in America sick, one of our neighbors sick. So they tell us we got to do this. So we say, okay, fine, we'll do that. But then where are we at the end of that day? Is all of this going to go back to normal beyond just the economy? Who's going to say, okay, hey, about those freedoms, about those liberties, let's get those back too?
We can't have a healthcare system without an economy. We have to feed our children. We got to work.
Yeah.
So we all want to make sure people are healthy, but there's always a balancing test. How is it we get back to work while doing whatever we reasonably can to make sure this contagion doesn't get out of control? That ought to be the goal of the administration and all the governors. Right now, it's completely inverted, that it's all about preserving us from the contagion without providing us any means to protect our health, which is an economy. It's crazed. It's crazed.
Yeah. All right, we got to leave it there. It's great to talk to you as always. I hope you had a great Easter with your family.
You too. Thanks, Larry. Bye-bye.
Thank you. It's Tom Fitton, Judicial Watch.
Thanks for listening to the Larry O'Connor Show podcast from 105.9 FM and AM 630, Washington's Mall, WMAL.